The morning sun cast long shadows across the military airbase as Captain walked toward the briefing room, her boots clicking against the concrete with measured precision. She could feel the eyes on her, the same way she had felt them every day for the past 3 years. Some looks were curious, others dismissive, and a few carried barely concealed hostility. At 28 years old, she was one of the youngest pilots on the base, and certainly the only woman in the fighter squadron. That combination had made her a target from day one. The whispers followed her like smoke. Too young, too soft, too feminine to handle the brutal reality of aerial combat. She had heard it all, sometimes to her face, more often behind her back. The other pilots treated her presence as a novelty at best, an unwelcome distraction at worst. They called her princess when they thought she couldn't hear, made jokes about her perfectly maintained equipment, suggested she'd be better suited to transport planes or ground operations. Some were more subtle in their condescension, offering to help with tasks she could handle perfectly well on her own, explaining basic concepts she had mastered years ago. Had learned early not to react. Every angry retort, every defense of her capabilities would only confirm their biases. So she smiled politely, kept her responses professional, and let her performance speak for itself. But performance, she had discovered, was never quite enough. When she scored well in simulations, they claimed the scenarios were too easy. When she executed maneuvers flawlessly, they attributed it to luck or ideal conditions. The goalposts shifted constantly, always just beyond her reach. The worst of them was Major. At 42, he was a decorated veteran with 15 years of combat experience, a man whose reputation preceded him into every room. He wore his achievements like armor, his chest decorated with medals that caught the light when he moved. Had made it clear from his first day that he considered her presence an insult to the squadron, a political appointment meant to satisfy diversity quotas rather than a legitimate addition to their fighting force. Their encounters had grown increasingly tense over the months. Never missed an opportunity to undermine her, questioning her decisions in briefings, critiquing her technique in front of junior officers, suggesting alternative approaches that implied incompetence rather than offering genuine guidance. He had a talent for making his attacks seem reasonable, cloaking his contempt in the language of professional concern. He worried about her stamina on long missions. He questioned whether she had the aggressive instinct necessary for dogfighting. He wondered aloud if the psychological pressure of combat might overwhelm someone of her disposition. Pushed through the heavy door into the briefing room, where a dozen pilots were already gathered, chatting in small groups or reviewing flight data on their tablets. The conversation didn't exactly stop when she entered, but it shifted, became more guarded. She took her usual seat near the back, pulling out her own tablet and pretending not to notice the glances, the slight turning away of shoulders that marked her as an outsider. Colonel entered exactly at 0800, his weathered face grave, carrying a folder that he placed deliberately on the podium. The room fell silent immediately. Was old-school military, a man who had flown combat missions when half the people in this room were still in school. He commanded absolute respect, not through fear, but through a combination of competence and fairness that had earned him loyalty across every rank. He began, then caught himself with a slight nod toward, "And Captain, we have a situation developing along our eastern border that requires immediate attention." He activated the large screen behind him, which displayed a tactical map marked with red zones and blue defensive positions. The border region had been contested territory for years, a buffer zone where military tensions occasionally flared into brief, intense conflicts before diplomatic solutions could be negotiated. The current buildup, however, looked more serious than the usual posturing. Intelligence indicates that hostile forces have been moving advanced fighter aircraft into forward positions over the past 72 hours, continued, his voice steady but edged with concern. We're looking at approximately 20 aircraft, including their models. This represents a significant escalation from previous deployments. A murmur ran through the assembled pilots. 20 aircraft was not a defensive posture. That was preparation for an offensive operation, a strike package designed to establish air superiority before ground forces moved in. Everyone in the room understood the implications immediately. "Our mission is straightforward," said, tapping the screen to zoom in on a specific sector. "We need to establish a defensive air patrol along this corridor, demonstrate our readiness to respond, and gather intelligence on their operational patterns. This is officially a reconnaissance and deterrence operation, but I want everyone prepared for the possibility of engagement." He began assigning patrol routes and aircraft pairings. listened carefully, expecting to be assigned a support role or left off the roster entirely. It wouldn't be the first time she had been excluded from critical operations under the guise of protecting her from unnecessary risk. But when called her name, assigning her to a forward patrol sector, she felt a spike of both pride and apprehension. Before she could fully process the assignment, his voice cut through the room. "Colonel, with respect, I'd like to suggest a reconsideration of that assignment." Sighs narrowed slightly. "Explain." "This sector," stood and walked to the map, pointing at assigned patrol route, "is the most likely flashpoint for initial contact. If their aircraft cross the border, this is where we'll see them first. That means whoever patrols this zone needs to be ready for immediate combat engagement, potentially outnumbered with no backup available for at least 8 minutes." He turned to face the room, his expression carefully neutral, professional. "I'm not questioning Captain's technical abilities in controlled situations, but combat is different. It requires instincts honed through experience, split-second decisions under extreme stress, the kind of aggressive mindset that comes from years in the cockpit, not months. Assigning someone without combat experience to our most critical patrol sector puts our entire defensive posture at risk." The room had gone completely silent. Every eye shifted between, and Colonel felt her face flush, her hands clenching involuntarily beneath the table. Every word spoke was calculated to sound reasonable, to frame his objection as tactical rather than personal, but the message was clear. She wasn't ready. She couldn't be trusted. She was a liability. "Captain," said quietly, looking directly at her, "do you feel prepared to handle this assignment?" It was a test and knew it. If she admitted any hesitation, any doubt, it would confirm everything had said. But false bravado would be equally transparent. She needed to thread the needle between confidence and realism. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice level, "I've logged more flight hours in the past year than anyone else in this squadron. I've studied every tactical scenario we have on file for border engagements. I know my aircraft inside and out. I understand the risks of this assignment, and I'm ready to execute it to the best of my abilities." "The best of her abilities," interjected smoothly, "may not be sufficient when lives are on the line. This isn't about ego or proving a point. It's about operational effectiveness. Give me that sector, Colonel. Let Captain take my original assignment, the northern route. Lower risk, better backup options, more appropriate for her experience level." Studied both of them for a long moment. Could see him weighing the options, calculating risks and benefits. She wanted to argue further, to insist on her capabilities, but she forced herself to remain silent. Desperation would only make things worse. "Major," finally said, "I appreciate your tactical considerations, but assignments stand as given. Captain has earned this position through her performance record. If you have concerns about her readiness, those should have been raised during her qualification reviews, not minutes before a critical mission." His jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Understood, sir." The briefing continued, covering communication protocols, engagement rules, emergency procedures, and extraction points. Absorbed every detail, committing the information to memory with fierce concentration. She couldn't afford a single mistake, not with everyone waiting for her to fail. When the briefing concluded and pilots began filing out toward the hangar, felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Captain, one of the few pilots who had treated her with consistent respect. He was older than by a decade, with a calm demeanor that had earned him the nickname Steady among his peers. "Don't let get in your head," said quietly. "He pulls this with anyone he sees as a threat." "A threat," couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. "He sees me as a joke, not a threat." "No," shook his head. "If you were a joke, he'd ignore you. You're good, better than he wants to admit. That's what bothers him. Every successful mission you fly, every clean execution, it chips away at the narrative he's built about what a fighter pilot should look like." Wanted to believe him, but years of constant undermining had left their mark. What if he's right, though? What if I'm not ready for combat? "Then you'll learn fast, same as everyone else did their first time," replied pragmatically. "But I've flown enough missions to recognize real talent, and you have it. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and don't try to prove anything to anyone except yourself." The walk to the hangar felt longer than usual, each step carrying closer to a moment that would define her career one way or another. She ran through mental checklists, reviewing procedures she had practiced thousands of times. Her aircraft was waiting in its designated bay, sleek and deadly, its weapons systems armed and ready. The ground crew had already completed their preparations, and the crew chief gave her a thumbs up as she approached. Climbed into the cockpit with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through the pre-flight checklist automatically while her mind focused on the mission ahead. The cockpit was her sanctuary, the one place where doubt had no room to exist. Here, there was only aircraft and sky, physics and precision. Here, she was in complete control. The engine roared to life beneath her, that familiar vibration running through her body like electricity. She completed her systems checks, communications with tower control, and waited for clearance to taxi. Around the airfield, other aircraft were spinning up, creating a symphony of mechanical power that never failed to quicken her pulse. Flight 37, you are cleared for taxi to runway 23. The tower controller's voice crackled in her helmet. 37, taxiing to 23, confirmed, guiding her aircraft out of the bay and toward the runway. The tower was a blur of controlled chaos, with multiple aircraft preparing for departure simultaneously. Followed the taxiway markers with precision, her eyes scanning instruments and external references in constant rhythm. She could see aircraft ahead of her in the queue, his tail number clearly visible. For a moment, she imagined what he must be thinking, probably hoping she would make some mistake during launch, prove his assessment correct before the mission even began. She pushed the thought aside. Opinions were irrelevant now. All that mattered was executing the mission perfectly, proving to herself that she belonged here, that 3 years of constant doubt and dismissal had not been for nothing. The stakes were higher than pride or career advancement. If hostile aircraft crossed that border, lives would depend on her ability to respond correctly, to make the right decisions under pressure, to fight effectively and survive. Flight 37, you are cleared for takeoff, the controller announced. Acknowledged and advanced the throttle, feeling the familiar surge of acceleration as her aircraft rolled forward, gathering speed, the runway lights blurring past in streaks. The moment when the wheels left the ground was always transcendent, that instant when metal and physics conspired to defy gravity, when she stopped being earthbound and became something else entirely. The aircraft climbed steeply into the morning sky, which had transformed from the soft colors of dawn into a brilliant blue expanse. Banked toward her assigned patrol sector, watching other aircraft from her squadron spreading out across the border region in a carefully coordinated defensive pattern. Each pilot was a single piece of a larger tactical puzzle, positioned to provide overlapping coverage while maintaining enough separation to avoid becoming easy targets. The flight to her patrol zone took 18 minutes, during which maintained radio discipline and focused on her instruments. The border appeared below as an abstract line on her navigation display, an arbitrary human demarcation that natural geography ignored entirely. From this altitude, the contested territory looked peaceful, almost beautiful, with early morning light casting dramatic shadows across the landscape. All flights, this is Control, the radio crackled. Intelligence update. We have confirmed radar contacts bearing 00, distance approximately 100 kilometers from the border. Estimated 20 aircraft in multiple formations. They are maintaining position but appear to be preparing for some type of operation. Stay alert and report any changes immediately. Grip tightened on the controls. 20 aircraft, just as the briefing had indicated. The enemy was there, close enough to cross the border in minutes if they chose to. Her heart rate increased slightly, but her breathing remained controlled, steady. This was what she had trained for, prepared for, imagined in countless simulations. The moment of truth was approaching, and she would either prove herself capable or validate every doubt that had ever been expressed about her. The next 4 hours passed in tense vigilance. Flew her patrol pattern with mechanical precision, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon and her instruments, looking for any indication that the hostile aircraft were moving. She maintained communication with control and nearby flights, reporting her status at regular intervals. Everything was professional, routine, exactly as it should be. But beneath that professional exterior, doubt gnawed at her. What if was right? What if her lack of combat experience proved fatal when it mattered most? What if she froze or panicked or made some crucial error that cost lives? The questions circled her mind like vultures, waiting for any sign of weakness to descend and feast. She was so focused on her internal struggle that she almost missed it. A flicker on her radar display, barely noticeable, a ghost contact at the very edge of her detection range. His eyes locked onto the screen, watching as the contact appeared and disappeared, too regular to be random interference, too subtle to be an obvious approach. Training kicked in before conscious thought could interfere. Her hand moved to the communication switch while her eyes remained locked on the radar display, watching the intermittent contact that appeared and vanished like a phantom. Protocol dictated immediate reporting of any suspicious activity, but something made her hesitate. The contact was so faint, so irregular, that it could easily be dismissed as equipment malfunction or atmospheric interference. If she reported it and turned out to be wrong, it would become another mark against her judgment, more ammunition for those who questioned her capabilities. But if she was right and stayed silent, hostile aircraft could cross the border undetected. Lives could be lost. The mission could be compromised. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her, making each second feel like an eternity. She made her decision. Control, this is 3-7. I have possible radar contact, bearing 087, very faint and intermittent, requesting guidance. There was a pause before Control responded, longer than the usual communication lag. 3-7, we're not showing anything on that bearing. Can you confirm your equipment is functioning properly? Ran a quick diagnostic on her radar system. All indicators showed green, normal operation. Systems check normal, Control. Contact continues to appear intermittently, consistent with low-altitude flight profile attempting to avoid detection. Another pause, then a different voice came through, one she recognized immediately as Colonel. 3-7, this is actual. Maintain your patrol pattern but keep monitoring that sector. We'll run our own analysis. Other flights, anyone else picking up unusual contacts. A chorus of negative responses came through. Felt her stomach sink. She was the only one seeing this. That meant either she had detected something everyone else had missed, or her equipment was malfunctioning despite showing normal diagnostics, or worst of all, she was so nervous that she was seeing threats where none existed. His voice cut through the radio chatter, unmistakable in its barely concealed satisfaction. Control, this is 2-4. Recommend we pull 3-7 back for equipment check. Can't have unreliable sensors in our forward position. 2-4, maintain radio discipline. His voice was sharp. 3-7, continue monitoring and report any changes. His hands were steady on the controls, but inside she was shaking. This was exactly the scenario she had feared, being put to the test with everyone watching, waiting for her to fail. She stared at her radar display with fierce concentration, willing the contact to reappear to prove she wasn't imagining things. Seconds crawled by, then minutes. The contact didn't reappear. Felt sweat trickling down her spine despite the cockpit's climate control. Maybe was right. Maybe she had let her nerves get the better of her, seeing patterns in random noise because she was so desperate to prove herself. She was about to key her radio and admit the contact had disappeared when suddenly it was back, stronger this time, more defined. Not one contact, but multiple, at least 3 distinct radar returns, all flying in close formation at extremely low altitude, heading directly toward the border. Control 3-7. His voice was urgent now, all doubt evaporating in the face of concrete data. Multiple contacts confirmed, 3 aircraft minimum, bearing 085, altitude estimated below 500 meters, speed approximately 900 kilometers per hour. They are heading for the border. This time, Control's response was immediate. 3-7 confirmed. We're tracking them now on our systems. They must have been in a radar shadow from the terrain. Good catch. All flights, we have hostile aircraft approaching the border. Move to intercept positions, but do not engage unless they cross into our airspace. Aircraft was closest to the projected crossing point. She adjusted her heading, diving to gain speed while calculating intercept vectors. Her training had covered this scenario dozens of times, but simulation and reality were different beasts. The hostile aircraft were real, flown by real pilots who wanted to complete their mission as badly as she wanted to stop them. There would be no reset button, no instructor calling an end to the exercise. 3-7, you are closest to intercept. His voice carried absolute calm despite the tension of the situation. Move to visual range but maintain defensive posture. Remember your rules of engagement. We demonstrate resolve, not aggression. 3-7 understood. His voice was steadier than she felt. She pushed her throttle forward, feeling the aircraft surge with power, closing the distance to the hostile contacts at tremendous speed. The enemy aircraft appeared first as dots against the landscape, then resolved into distinctive silhouettes. She recognized them immediately from her studies. Advanced multi-role fighters, newer models than anything her squadron flew, equipped with cutting-edge avionics and weapon systems. They were flying in tight formation, hugging the terrain with skill that indicated experienced pilots. Positioned herself between the hostile formation and the border, a clear visual message that their path was blocked. At this range, she could see them clearly through her canopy, three sleek aircraft painted in aggressive camouflage patterns. They showed no sign of altering course. Control 37 has visual on three hostile aircraft. They are maintaining course toward the border, no indication of turning away. 37 maintain position. Additional flights are en route to support you. ETA 4 minutes. 4 minutes? In aerial combat, that was an eternity. If these aircraft crossed the border and she engaged them alone, she would be outnumbered 3-1, facing pilots flying superior equipment. Every tactical manual she had ever read emphasized that such odds were nearly impossible to overcome. The smart move would be to fall back, wait for support, engage with numerical parity. But falling back meant allowing them to cross the border unchallenged, creating the impression of weakness that could embolden further incursions. It meant failing in her assigned mission to defend this sector. It meant proving right that she didn't have the aggressive instinct necessary for this role. The hostile aircraft were less than 2 kilometers from the border now. Could see them adjusting their formation slightly, preparing for whatever came next. Her threat warning system began chirping, indicating that their radar had locked onto her aircraft, painting her as a target. They were preparing to engage if she interfered. "Control, I'm being targeted," reported, keeping her voice level despite her racing heart. "Hostile aircraft still approaching the border. 37, weapons free if they cross. Repeat, weapons free upon border violation, but hold position until they commit." His finger rested lightly on her weapon controls. The distance to the border was shrinking rapidly. 1 kilometer, 800 meters. She could see the lead aircraft's cockpit now, could almost imagine the pilot inside making the same calculations she was, weighing risk against mission objectives. 500 meters to the border. The hostile formation began to spread out, a tactical maneuver designed to present multiple targets and complicate defensive responses. They were committing to the incursion, gambling that a single defender wouldn't dare engage against such odds. They were wrong. The moment the lead aircraft crossed the invisible line that marked the border, acted. She had already calculated the engagement, planned her moves, positioned herself optimally. Her first missile launch was textbook perfect, the weapon dropping away from her aircraft and igniting, streaking toward the lead hostile with a trail of white smoke. The hostile pilot reacted instantly, throwing his aircraft into a violent evasive maneuver while deploying countermeasures. Flares erupted from his aircraft like fireworks, bright spots of heat designed to confuse the missile's seeker. But had anticipated this, had selected the perfect launch parameters. The missile ignored the flares, tracking its target with relentless precision. The explosion was a bright orange flower blooming in the sky. The lead hostile aircraft staggered, trailing smoke, then began a rapid descent. Saw the pilot eject, the tiny figure of the ejection seat arcing away from the dying aircraft. One down, but the other two were already reacting, breaking formation and maneuvering to engage her. Threw her aircraft into a hard turn, feeling the G-forces press her into her seat, her vision narrowing slightly at the edges. Training and instinct guided her movements, no time now for conscious thought, only reaction and counter-reaction. A missile launch warning screamed in her helmet. One of the hostile aircraft had fired at her. Reversed her turn, diving hard while deploying her own countermeasures. The missile passed overhead, close enough that she could see it through her canopy, then detonated harmlessly as it lost lock. She used the dive to build speed, then pulled up hard, climbing vertically and rolling to acquire her next target. The second hostile aircraft was trying to get on her tail, a classic pursuit maneuver. Let him think he was succeeding, leading him into the trap she was setting. At the top of her climb, she rolled inverted and pulled through, converting altitude into a slashing dive that brought her around and behind her pursuer. The hostile pilot realized his mistake too late, trying to break away, but was already firing. Her cannon rounds stitched across his aircraft's fuselage, critical hits that sent it spinning out of control. 2 down, but where was the third? The answer came with another missile warning. The third hostile had positioned himself perfectly while was engaged with his wingman, and now he had a clean shot. His tactical display showed the missile tracking toward her, closing the distance at impossible speed. She had seconds to react. She deployed all her countermeasures at once, a desperate cloud of flares and chaff, while pulling the hardest turn her aircraft could handle. The G-forces were crushing, darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision, but she held the turn, straining against the forces that wanted to make her black out. The missile detonated close enough to rock her aircraft with its shockwave. Alarms began screaming as shrapnel from the explosion damaged her right engine. Fought to control the aircraft, which wanted to roll and spin from the asymmetric thrust. She managed to stabilize it, but she was hurt now, bleeding speed and maneuverability. The third hostile aircraft was moving in for the kill, sensing weakness. His damaged aircraft couldn't match his performance anymore. She was going to lose this fight. Unless she could do something unexpected. Shut down her damaged engine completely, letting the aircraft slow dramatically. To an outside observer, it would look like she was in serious trouble, possibly going down. The hostile pilot took the bait, closing distance to confirm the kill. Waited, counting seconds, letting him get closer. Her hand hovered over the engine restart control. Everything depended on timing, on nerves, on the kind of calculated risk that separated adequate pilots from exceptional ones. The hostile aircraft was 300 meters away, 200, close enough that she could see the pilot's helmet, close enough for what she had planned. Hit the engine restart, simultaneously jamming her throttle to maximum and pulling the hardest turn physics would allow. Her aircraft, suddenly accelerating from its near-stall, reverse direction in a maneuver that should have been impossible. The hostile pilot, committed to his attack run, had no time to react. His aircraft slashed across his path at a perpendicular angle. She fired her remaining missile at point-blank range, too close for it to arm properly, but with enough kinetic energy to cause massive damage. The missile struck the hostile aircraft's wing, shearing it off completely. The hostile fighter began tumbling immediately, aerodynamic forces tearing it apart. Saw the pilot eject just before the aircraft exploded, another parachute blooming against the sky. 3 down, all 3 hostile aircraft destroyed or disabled within the space of 2 minutes. Aircraft was damaged but flyable, her hands shaking now with adrenaline, her breath coming in short gasps. The radio exploded with voices, everyone talking at once. Control demanding status reports, other pilots asking what happened, and underneath it all, shocked silence from those who had witnessed what she had just accomplished. "Control, this is 3-7, managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady. 3 hostile aircraft engaged and neutralized. I have sustained damage to my right engine, but aircraft is controllable, requesting clearance to return to base. 3-7, you are cleared for immediate return. Medical and emergency crews are standing by. Outstanding work, Captain." As turned her damaged aircraft toward home, she heard his voice on the radio, tight with something that might have been anger or might have been grudging respect. 3-7-2-4. Confirm you engaged 3 aircraft alone. Confirmed 2-4, 3 hostiles all down. There was a long pause before responded. Well executed. It was perhaps the closest thing to praise she would ever receive from him, and in that moment it was enough. Nursed her damaged aircraft through the flight back to base, every system carefully monitored, every vibration analyzed. The landing was tricky with only 1 engine, but she brought the aircraft down smoothly, rolling to a stop on the runway with emergency vehicles racing alongside. As she climbed out of the cockpit on shaking legs, she found Colonel waiting, along with what seemed like half the base personnel. The Colonel's weathered face showed something she had never seen before, unmistakable pride. "Captain," he said formally, then smiled. "Exceptional performance. Your tactical awareness and combat execution were exactly what we needed in that critical moment." Wanted to say something modest, professional, but the words wouldn't come. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her drained and slightly dizzy. She had done it. She had proven herself in the most definitive way possible, in actual combat against overwhelming odds. But as she looked around at the faces of her fellow pilots, she saw something that made her victory feel incomplete. Yes, there was respect there now, acknowledgement of what she had accomplished. But there was also resentment, disbelief, the kind of stunned reaction that comes when fundamental assumptions are challenged. She had destroyed 3 enemy aircraft in her first combat engagement. She had defended the border single-handedly when others thought she should have fallen back. She had executed maneuvers that pilots with years more experience would have hesitated to attempt. And in doing so, She had made them question everything they thought they knew about who could be an elite fighter pilot. The celebration that followed was strange and subdued. People congratulated her, but their words felt hollow, obligatory. They replayed her combat footage in the briefing room, analyzing every move, and while they acknowledged the skill involved, they found ways to diminish it. Lucky positioning. The enemy pilots made mistakes. Modern missiles do most of the work anyway. Was conspicuously silent during the debriefing, his face an unreadable mask. When asked if he had any comments on the engagement, he simply shook his head. That night lay in her quarters unable to sleep. Replaying the combat in the week following's combat engagement passed in a strange blur of heightened attention and subtle isolation. Official recognition came swiftly and publicly. Colonel personally presented her with a commendation during a formal ceremony attended by senior officers from multiple commands. The citation praised her tactical awareness, aggressive execution, and extraordinary piloting skills demonstrated during the border incursion. Photographers captured the moment, and within days her image appeared in military publications and even civilian media outlets hungry for stories of heroism. But away from the cameras and formal proceedings, the atmosphere within the squadron remained complicated and tense. Notice the changes immediately. Conversations would pause when she entered a room, then resume with forced casualness. Pilots who had previously ignored her now watched her with careful attention, studying her movements and words as if trying to decode some secret. The easy camaraderie that existed among the other squadron members never quite extended to include her, despite her proven capabilities. Major's behavior was perhaps the most unsettling. He no longer made openly dismissive comments or questioned her assignments in briefings. Instead, he treated her with a cold, professional courtesy that felt more hostile than his previous condescension. He would acknowledge her presence with a curt nod, respond to her communications with minimal words, and generally behave as if she were a piece of equipment rather than a fellow pilot. His face, whenever she caught him looking at her, carried an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't respect, but it wasn't dismissal either. It was something darker, more complex. Threw herself into her work, volunteering for additional patrols, spending hours in the simulator refining techniques, studying intelligence reports about enemy aircraft and tactics. If she couldn't find acceptance among her peers, she would excel so thoroughly that acceptance became irrelevant. Every mission would be executed flawlessly. Every training exercise would be dominated. She would force them to acknowledge not just that she belonged, but that she was exceptional. The strategy seemed to work, at least on the surface. Her performance evaluations were outstanding. Commanders from other units requested her participation in joint exercises. She became the facto expert on low-altitude intercept tactics, teaching the techniques she had developed to pilots from across the military. Her tactical manual entries on single-aircraft defensive operations were distributed throughout the fighter community. But success, she was discovering, could breed its own problems. The more she excelled, the more she stood apart from her squadron. The other pilots began to view her not as one of them who happened to be exceptional, but as something different entirely, someone whose abilities were so unusual that they normal categorization. They respected her skills but couldn't relate to her, which in some ways was lonelier than their previous dismissal. 3 weeks after her first combat engagement, was sitting in the ready room reviewing weather data for an upcoming patrol when Captain dropped into the seat beside her. He was one of the few pilots who still treated her the same as before, his steady demeanor unchanged by her newfound status. "You're doing it again," he said without preamble. Looked up from her tablet. "Doing what?" "Isolating yourself. You spend every free moment working, training, studying. When was the last time you just relaxed, talked with people about something other than flying?" "I'm focused on my duties," replied, turning back to her weather data. "Same as everyone else." "No, not the same." His voice was gentle but firm. "Everyone else has balance. They train hard, they fly their missions, but they also maintain connections with their fellow pilots. They build relationships, share experiences, develop the kind of trust that makes a squadron effective. You're so busy proving yourself that you're forgetting to be part of the team." Felt a flash of anger. "The team has made it pretty clear I'm not welcome as part of it. I've tried being friendly, tried fitting in. All I got was condescension and exclusion, so I chose a different path. Excellence they can't ignore or dismiss." "Excellence they can't relate to either," countered. "You've become this perfect, untouchable figure. Nobody knows how to approach you anymore. You don't make mistakes, you don't show vulnerability, you don't need help with anything. That's intimidating. It creates distance. I show vulnerability and they use it against me. I make mistakes and they say it proves I don't belong. I ask for help and they say I'm not qualified. There's no winning move here. He was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Maybe you're right. Maybe the situation was always impossible. But I've been watching what's happening, and I think you're missing something important. Which is planning something. Attention sharpened immediately. What do you mean? He's been having private meetings with some of the other pilots. Quiet conversations that stop when anyone else approaches. He's also been spending a lot of time reviewing your mission footage, analyzing your tactics in detail. And he's requested a special training exercise, something involving multiple aircraft in a complex scenario. He won't discuss the details with anyone except Colonel. A chill ran down spine. You think he's setting me up for something? I think he's not someone who accepts being proven wrong, and you proved him very wrong. Men like their entire identity is built on being the best, the most experienced, the most capable. When someone challenges that, especially someone they've publicly dismissed, they don't just accept it. They retaliate. What can he possibly do? My record is spotless. My performance exceeds every standard. That's exactly the problem, said seriously. He can't attack your competence anymore, so he'll attack something else. Your judgment, your teamwork, your decision-making under complex circumstances. He'll create a situation designed to make you fail, or at least to make you look questionable. Wanted to dismiss the warning as paranoia, but she couldn't. She had seen the way he looked at her, that dark calculation in his eyes. She had felt the tension in the squadron, the sense of unfinished business hanging in the air. Was right. Something was coming. The summons came 2 days later. Colonel called an emergency briefing for all squadron pilots, marked as mandatory attendance with no exceptions. Arrived early, taking her usual seat and watching as the room filled with her fellow pilots. Entered last, carrying a folder and wearing an expression of grim satisfaction that made instincts scream warnings. Began without preamble. Intelligence has identified a significant threat development that requires an immediate operational response. Major has designed a training exercise to prepare us for this scenario, and he'll brief the details now. Move to the front of the room, activating the tactical display. Based on recent enemy activity patterns, we've concluded that they're planning a major air operation designed to penetrate our defenses and strike strategic targets deep in our territory. They'll use a multi-vector approach with decoys, electronic warfare, and coordinated strikes designed to overwhelm our response capability. He brought up a complex tactical map showing multiple attack vectors, dozens of simulated enemy aircraft, and defensive positions. This exercise will simulate that attack scenario. We'll have 12 aircraft defending against a simulated force of 30 attackers. The attackers will have every advantage: superior numbers, element of surprise, advanced electronic countermeasures. Our job is to prevent them from reaching their targets. Studied the scenario with growing unease. It was enormously complex, requiring perfect coordination between defending aircraft, split-second decision-making, and aggressive tactics. The kind of scenario where individual excellence mattered less than team cohesion and mutual support. Captain said, his eyes locking onto her, "You'll be leading the defense." The room went completely silent. Every head turned to look at, reactions ranging from surprise to something that looked almost like pity. Leading a coordinated defense involving multiple aircraft was normally reserved for the most experienced squadron commanders. It required not just flying skills, but tactical vision, communication abilities, and the trust of every pilot under your command. His mind raced. This was the trap had warned about. Had designed a scenario so complex that failure was almost inevitable, then assigned her to lead it. When the defense collapsed under the weight of too many attackers and too few defenders, he could point to her leadership as the critical failure point. Not her flying skills, which were proven. Not her individual combat ability, which was exceptional. But her capacity to lead others, to function as part of a team, to make command decisions under pressure. "Sir," said carefully, looking at Colonel rather than, "while I appreciate the confidence, I'm not the most experienced officer available for this role. Perhaps someone with more command experience would be better suited." "Nonsense," interjected smoothly. "You're our best pilot according to all metrics. You've demonstrated exceptional tactical awareness and combat effectiveness. If you can destroy 3 enemy aircraft single-handedly, surely you can coordinate a defensive operation with 11 capable pilots supporting you, unless you feel the responsibility is beyond your capabilities. The trap snapped shut with those words. If she accepted the assignment, she would almost certainly fail in a very public, very documented way. If she declined, she would be admitting that her individual excellence didn't translate to leadership capability, confirming that she was fundamentally unsuited for advancement beyond her current role. "Captain will lead the defense," said, his voice carrying finality. "Major will command the attacking force. The exercise is scheduled for 0600 tomorrow. Detailed assignments and tactical data will be distributed within the hour." Dismissed. As pilots filed out of the briefing room, remained seated, staring at the complex tactical display. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible. 30 attackers against 12 defenders meant the enemy had a 2.5 to 1 numerical advantage. Add in their simulated electronic warfare capabilities and surprise attack vectors, and the defenders would be overwhelmed almost immediately. Appeared beside her seat. "He's really doing it, creating an impossible scenario and putting you in charge of handling it." "It's not impossible," said quietly, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "Difficult, yes, but not impossible. Listen to me. This isn't about winning or losing the exercise. Knows you're good enough that you might actually pull off something impressive even under these circumstances. His real goal is to isolate you from the other pilots, to demonstrate that you can't work with a team, that your individual skills don't translate to collaborative success." "What am I supposed to do? Refuse the assignment and prove I'm afraid of responsibility?" "No," shook his head. "You take the assignment, but you don't try to do it alone. You bring the other pilots in, you listen to their ideas, you build a collaborative strategy instead of trying to impose your own tactical vision. Make this about the team, not about you." It was good advice, new. The rational, politically savvy approach to an obvious trap. Build consensus, share credit, demonstrate collaborative leadership. But something inside her rebelled against that approach. She had spent 3 years trying to fit in, trying to be accepted, trying to prove she was one of them. All it had gotten her was condescension and exclusion. She had finally found success by embracing excellence, by being undeniable in her capabilities. Why should she compromise that now? "I appreciate the counsel," said, standing and gathering her materials. "But I'm going to handle this my way." That evening, locked herself in a private study room with the tactical data for the exercise. She had 18 hours to develop a defensive strategy that could somehow overcome impossible odds. 18 hours to prove that her individual brilliance could translate to command capability. 18 hours to win a battle that was designed for her to lose. She began by analyzing the attacking force's composition and likely strategies. Was an experienced tactician, and he would use his numerical advantage aggressively. He would split his forces to attack from multiple directions simultaneously, forcing the defenders to divide their attention and resources. He would use decoys and electronic warfare to create confusion and uncertainty. He would probe for weaknesses and exploit them ruthlessly. Traditional defensive doctrine called for establishing a layered defense, with different aircraft assigned to intercept attackers at various ranges and altitudes. The strategy relied on coordination and mutual support, with defenders working in pairs or small groups to provide backup and coverage. Against a force this large, that approach would fail quickly. The attackers would simply overwhelm individual defensive positions one at a time. Needed something different, something unexpected, something that used her strengths and compensated for her weaknesses. She stared at the tactical display for hours, moving simulated aircraft around, testing scenarios, calculating probabilities. Most strategies ended in rapid defensive collapse. A few managed to blunt the initial attack but fell apart under sustained pressure. Then around midnight, an idea began to form. It was audacious, probably reckless, definitely contrary to standard doctrine. But it might work. It would require perfect timing, absolute precision, and a level of personal risk that most commanders would never accept. It would also require the other pilots to trust her completely, to follow her commands without hesitation even when those commands seemed to defy logic. That was the biggest problem. She didn't have their trust. She had their grudging stood before the assembled pilots at 0530, her tactical plan displayed on the screen behind her. 11 faces looked back at her with varying degrees of skepticism, curiosity, and barely concealed doubt. These were accomplished fighter pilots, men with years of experience and proven combat records. They didn't know her, didn't trust her, and had every reason to question whether someone with a single combat engagement under her belt should be directing their actions in a complex scenario. She had two choices. She could present her strategy as a collaborative effort, softening her approach and inviting input to build consensus. Or she could own it completely, presenting her vision with absolute confidence and demanding they follow her lead. The first approach might earn her acceptance but would dilute the strategy's effectiveness. The second approach would maintain tactical coherence but reinforce her isolation. Made her choice, she would lead the way she knew how, with uncompromising excellence, and let the results speak for themselves. She began, her voice clear and authoritative. Major has designed this exercise to overwhelm our defensive capabilities through superior numbers and coordinated attacks. Standard defensive doctrine against such a force calls for layered interception, mutual support, and gradual attrition of the attacking force. That approach will fail. We'll be destroyed piecemeal, unable to concentrate our firepower effectively. She saw several pilots shift uncomfortably, probably wondering if she was about to announce their inevitable defeat. Instead, she activated the tactical display, showing her planned deployment. We're going to do the opposite of what they expect. Instead of spreading out to cover multiple sectors, we're going to concentrate our entire force into a single offensive spearhead. We'll abandon our defensive positions completely and strike directly at the heart of their attacking formation before they can fully deploy. The reaction was immediate. Multiple pilots began speaking at once, their objections overlapping. Captain, a veteran with 12 years of service, spoke loudest. "That's suicide. We leave our defensive positions unguarded, we fail our mission automatically. The attackers just fly past us to their targets." "They won't get the chance," replied calmly. "Our attack will target their command and control elements first. We'll be directing the attack personally, coordinating the multiple vectors. If we destroy his aircraft and the other command elements in the first 30 seconds of engagement, their coordinated attack falls apart into individual aircraft operating without central direction." 30 seconds, another pilot lieutenant laughed incredulously. "You're planning to destroy multiple specific aircraft in formation while they're fully alert and defended in 30 seconds. Not me, all of us working in perfect coordination." Brought up a detailed attack sequence on the display. "Each of you will have a specific target assigned based on your weapon's load and position. We'll approach at maximum speed from an unexpected vector. The attackers will be focused on their attack run toward our abandoned defensive positions. By the time they realize we've repositioned, we'll already be firing." "This is insane," said flatly. "Even if we somehow pull off this initial strike, we're still outnumbered 2-1 against the remaining attackers. Without defensive positions, without coordination, we'll be torn apart. The remaining attackers will be disorganized, leaderless, and psychologically shocked," countered. "We maintain our formation cohesion, we exploit their confusion, we systematically eliminate them in a sustained offensive operation. We don't give them time to regroup or reorganize. We stay aggressive, stay mobile, and use their numerical advantage against them by creating multiple engagement points where they interfere with each other." The room had gone quiet. Pilots were studying her tactical display with professional attention now, analyzing the approach she was proposing. It was audacious to the point of being reckless, but it wasn't stupid. The mathematics of aerial combat favored concentration of force over dispersal. If they could eliminate the enemy leadership quickly enough, the psychological and organizational impact might indeed create the chaos was predicting. "This requires perfect timing," Captain observed. He was the squadron's expert on precision coordination. "If anyone is even 2 seconds late on their attack run, the whole sequence collapses. The enemy will have time to react, to take defensive measures, to warn others. We get one chance at this. Which is why we're going to practice the sequence until we can execute it blindfolded," said. "We have 30 minutes before the exercise begins. I need absolute precision from every pilot. No improvisation, no individual heroics. We function as a single weapon with 12 components. Any questions?" Raised his hand. "What happens if this doesn't work? What's our contingency plan?" Met his eyes directly. "If this doesn't work, we've already lost. Our only contingency is to execute the plan flawlessly. I'm not asking you to like this approach or to have confidence in my leadership. I'm asking you to follow orders for the next hour and let the results determine whether I deserve to lead you." It wasn't the inspirational speech that might have won hearts and minds. It was cold, practical, demanding. But it was honest, and in that moment, honesty seemed to carry more weight than eloquence. The pilots began asking detailed questions about their specific roles, about timing sequences, about communication protocols. Answered each question with precision, demonstrating that she had thought through every aspect of the operation. Captain had remained silent throughout the briefing, but now he spoke up. "For what it's worth, I think this plan is brilliant. Risky as hell, but brilliant. I'll follow your lead, Captain." His endorsement carried weight, was respected throughout the squadron, known for his judgment and tactical acumen. Several other pilots nodded, their skepticism shifting toward cautious acceptance. They might not trust personally, but they trusted, and his confidence in her plan gave them something to hold on to. The next 25 minutes were intense and focused. Drilled the attack sequence relentlessly, correcting timing errors by fractions of a second, adjusting approach angles by single degrees. Some pilots chafed at her exacting standards, but they, recognizing that their survival in the exercise depended on absolute precision. At 05:55, 12 aircraft lifted off from the airbase, climbing into the pre-dawn darkness. Positioned her force exactly as planned, abandoning the defensive sectors they were supposed to protect and moving into attack position. Her radar showed the enemy force assembling 60 kilometers away. 30 aircraft organizing into the complex multi-vector attack formation had designed. "All flights, this is lead," transmitted, using the calm, authoritative voice she had practiced. "Enemy force is organizing for attack run. We maintain radio silence from this point until weapons release. Trust your assignments, trust your timing, trust each other. Lead out." She switched off her radio transmitter, leaving the channel open to receive, but preventing any communications that might give away their position. The other 11 aircraft followed suit. They flew in tight formation through the darkness, invisible to the enemy radar due to their low altitude and the terrain masking their approach. Watched her tactical display with absolute focus. The enemy aircraft were moving now, beginning their coordinated attack run toward the defensive positions they expected to find occupied. His command aircraft was clearly visible in the center of the formation, directing the operation. Several other command and control aircraft flanked him, coordinating the multiple attack vectors. Timing was everything now. Too early and the enemy would have time to react. Too late and they would be too spread out to engage effectively. Counted down seconds in her head, her hands steady on the controls, waiting for the perfect moment. 3, 2, 1. "Execute," transmitted, simultaneously lighting her afterburners and pulling into a sharp climb that brought her force into attack position. 11 other aircraft mirrored her movement with precision that would have been impossible without the intensive drilling they had just completed. The enemy force was caught completely by surprise. They had been focused on their attack vectors, expecting defensive aircraft to be ahead of them, not attacking from their flank at high speed. By the time their threat warning systems began screaming alerts, force was already firing. Her missile locked onto his aircraft instantly. She fired without hesitation, watching the weapon streak away. Around her, 10 other missiles launched simultaneously, each targeting a specific command aircraft. The sky lit up with missile trails, a coordinated salvo that hit the enemy formation like a hammer. Reacted with the skill of a veteran, throwing his aircraft into evasive maneuvers and deploying countermeasures. But had anticipated this, had studied his flying style from every piece of footage she could find. She knew he favored hard left brakes and high G turns. Her missile was programmed for exactly that response profile. The simulated kill registered on both their displays simultaneously. Aircraft, in the artificial constraints of the exercise, was officially destroyed. 6 other command aircraft went down in the same salvo, their pilots too surprised to react effectively. The enemy formation, suddenly leaderless and disorganized, began to fall apart. "Reform on me," transmitted. "Pursue and destroy, weapons free on all targets." What followed was the most intense 20 minutes of flying had ever experienced. The remaining enemy aircraft, shocked and disorganized, tried to regroup and respond to the unexpected assault. But force gave them no time to recover. They maintained offensive pressure, systematically eliminating enemy aircraft with coordinated attacks that prevented individual pilots from receiving support. Tactical vision proved eerily accurate. The enemy's numerical advantage became a liability as aircraft interfered with each other, creating confusion and preventing effective responses. Pilots tried to follow the attack plan had designed, but without central coordination, the plan fell apart into individual actions that Force could predict and counter. She was everywhere in the battle, directing traffic, calling out targets, coordinating attacks. Her voice on the radio was calm and precise, providing the organizational structure that the enemy lacked. When Lieutenant found himself trapped by two enemy aircraft, vectored Captain to provide support, creating a two-on-two engagement that her pilots won. When the enemy tried to reform into a defensive formation, she redirected her entire force to break it apart before it could solidify. The defending force suffered losses, of course. 3 of its aircraft took simulated damage that forced them to withdraw from the exercise. But the exchange ratio was devastating for the attackers. For every defending aircraft lost, 5 or 6 enemy aircraft went down. The enemy's numerical advantage evaporated under sustained, coordinated assault. 23 minutes into the engagement, it was over. The remaining enemy aircraft, 2 damaged or 2 demoralized to continue, acknowledged defeat. Of the 30 aircraft that had begun the attack, only 4 remained combat-capable. Of the 12 defending aircraft, 9 were still operational, having successfully prevented any enemy aircraft from reaching their targets. The flight back to base was conducted in silence, each pilot processing what had just occurred. They had won an exercise that should have been impossible to win. They had executed a strategy that conventional doctrine, and they had done it under the leadership of the pilot many of them had doubted could even function as part of a team. The debriefing was subdued and strange. Colonel reviewed the exercise data with an expression that shifted between impressed and concerned. Major sat in the back of the room, his face an impassive mask, saying nothing. Captain finally said, "Your tactical approach was highly unorthodox. Abandoning defensive positions entirely represents significant risk in a real combat scenario." "Yes, sir," acknowledged. "The approach was designed specifically for the parameters of this exercise. Against a different threat profile or with different force ratios, alternative strategies would be more appropriate." Nevertheless, continued, the execution was exceptional. The coordinated opening strike achieved results that frankly exceeded what I thought possible with the forces available. The sustained offensive operation that followed demonstrated tactical flexibility and effective command control. This will be studied as an example of how concentration of force and aggressive action can overcome numerical disadvantages. He paused, looking around the room at the assembled pilots. "I'd like to hear from others who participated in the exercise. How did you experience Captain's leadership?" There was an uncomfortable silence. Then Captain spoke up. She was exacting in her requirements during preparation, very precise, very demanding, but that precision is what made the opening strike work. Without perfect timing, we would have been destroyed. Her tactical direction during the engagement was clear and appropriate. She saw the battlefield comprehensively and positioned our forces effectively. Other pilots offered similar assessments. Professional, competent, tactically sound. The words were correct, even complimentary, but they carried an emotional distance that suggested respect without warmth, acknowledgement without acceptance. When the debriefing concluded and pilots began filing out, Major approached. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes held that same dark calculation she had seen before. "Congratulations on your victory, Captain," he said formally. "Thank you, sir," met his gaze directly, refusing to show any uncertainty. "You proved today that individual excellence can indeed translate to command effectiveness, at least in carefully controlled scenarios." His emphasis on the last phrase was subtle but unmistakable. "I'm sure this success will be remembered." He walked away before could respond, leaving her with an unsettled feeling that had nothing to do with the exhaustion of the exercise. The encounter felt less like an acknowledgement of her success and more like a promise of future conflict. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Captain appeared at her elbow. "You did it. You actually pulled off the impossible." "We pulled it off," corrected. "I designed the plan, but the execution required everyone working together." "Don't be modest. That was your vision, your strategy, your leadership." His expression was serious. "But you need to understand something. What you did today was amazing from a tactical standpoint, but it didn't solve your real problem. If anything, it made it worse." "What do you mean?" "Look around. Listen to how people are talking about you. They respect what you accomplished, but they're even more intimidated now than before. You didn't become one of them today. You became something separate, something extraordinary, but also something apart. Does that make sense? It did make sense, though didn't want to acknowledge it. She had proven she could lead, could command, could achieve the impossible. But she had done it in a way that reinforced her isolation rather than ending it. She was the brilliant tactician who could win impossible battles. But she wasn't their comrade, wasn't their friend, wasn't truly part of the squadron in any meaningful emotional sense. "I don't know how to fix that," admitted quietly. 3 days after the exercise, received orders that changed everything. She was summoned to a meeting at Regional Command Headquarters, a facility 200 kilometers from her home base. The summons provided no details about the purpose of the meeting, only that her attendance was mandatory and that she should prepare for possible extended assignment away from her squadron. The flight to headquarters gave her time to think about everything that had happened. She had achieved what she set out to accomplish, proving beyond any doubt that she belonged among the elite fighter pilots. Her combat record was spotless. Her tactical innovations were being studied and adopted. She had overcome impossible odds multiple times. By every objective measure, she had succeeded. So why did success feel so hollow? Regional Command Headquarters was an imposing complex of modern buildings surrounded by layers of security. Presented her credentials at multiple checkpoints before being escorted to a conference room on the top floor. Inside, she found a group of senior officers she didn't recognize, along with Colonel, who gave her an encouraging nod. A general she recognized from photographs as the Regional Air Force commander gestured for her to sit. "Captain, thank you for coming. I'll get straight to the point. We're forming a new tactical unit designed to address emerging threats that require unconventional approaches and exceptional pilot skills. Based on your recent performance and demonstrated capabilities, we'd like you to be part of this unit." His mind raced. This was recognition at the highest level, validation that her abilities had been noticed by the most senior leadership. "Sir, I'm honored. What would this assignment entail?" "The unit will operate independently from standard squadron structures," another officer explained, spreading tactical maps across the conference table. "You'll receive priority access to advanced aircraft and weapons systems. Your missions will be high-risk, high-value operations that can't be accomplished through conventional force deployment. Essentially, we're building a capability for surgical strikes and critical interventions." It sounded impressive, prestigious, exactly the kind of opportunity any pilot would dream of receiving, but something about the proposal made hesitate. "Would I maintain connection with my current squadron?" "No," the general said directly. "This would be a permanent reassignment. You'd work with other pilots selected for this unit, all of them chosen for exceptional individual capabilities. The focus is on elite performance, not traditional unit cohesion." There it was, the offer that would cement her separation from her squadron, that would officially mark her as different, as apart, as something other than a regular fighter pilot. She would have everything she thought she wanted: recognition, advanced equipment, important missions, freedom from the constant skepticism and subtle hostility she faced at her home base. But she would also have confirmation that she would never belong, never be accepted as part of a normal squadron, never experience the camaraderie and connection she saw among other pilots. She would be the elite specialist, always separate, always alone, always defined by her exceptional abilities rather than her shared humanity. "May I have time to consider this offer, sir?" asked carefully. The general looked surprised. Most pilots would have accepted immediately, seeing this as the opportunity of a lifetime. "You have 48 hours. But, Captain, I should make clear that opportunities like this don't come often. We're offering you a chance to operate at the highest levels of tactical aviation." Returned to her base in a state of deep uncertainty. She went through her duties mechanically, flying routine patrols and attending briefings, while her mind wrestled with the decision facing her. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, had been building toward exactly this kind of recognition. Turning it down would be professionally insane. That evening, unable to sleep, found herself wandering toward the squadron common area, a space she usually avoided because it served as the social hub where pilots gathered to relax and socialize. She had never felt welcome there, had always been acutely aware of conversations that quieted when she entered, of groups that didn't invite her to join them. But tonight, perhaps because she was wrestling with such a profound decision, she pushed through the door anyway. A dozen pilots were scattered around the room, some playing cards, others watching a football match on the large screen, a few engaged in animated discussion about aircraft modifications. The conversation didn't exactly stop when she entered, but it shifted, became more guarded. Stood awkwardly near the entrance, suddenly aware that she had no idea how to just exist in a social space with these people. She had been so focused on proving her professional worth that she had never learned the simple human skill of casual interaction with her peers. Captain noticed her hesitation and waved her over to where he was sitting with several other pilots. "Join us. We're arguing about the best approach to low-altitude penetration tactics. Your perspective would be valuable." It was a professional topic, something she could engage with confidently. Sat down and the discussion resumed. But she noticed something as the conversation flowed. The other pilots weren't just talking about tactics in abstract technical terms. They were sharing stories, talking about their experiences, relating the theory to personal moments of fear, triumph, confusion, and learning. The discussion was as much about human experience as it was about aircraft performance. Lieutenant was describing a training mission where he had completely misjudged his altitude and nearly crashed, saved only by his instructor's quick intervention. He told the story with self-deprecating humor, and the other pilots laughed with recognition, sharing their own moments of error and vulnerability. Realized she had never done that. She had never admitted mistakes, never shared moments of doubt or confusion, never allowed anyone to see her as anything other than the competent, controlled, perfect pilot. She had thought that showing vulnerability would give ammunition to those who questioned her belonging. But in avoiding vulnerability, she had also avoided the very connections that made people trust and care about each other. Captain said, pulling her into the conversation, "You flew that impossible intercept on your first combat mission, but surely it wasn't all perfect execution. What was going through your mind when that third hostile got a missile lock on you?" It was an opening, an invitation to share something real. Instinct was to deflect, to maintain the image of unshakable competence. But something made her pause and actually consider the question honestly. "I was terrified," she admitted quietly. The words felt strange, foreign, but also liberating. "When that missile warning went off, my first thought was that I had made a terrible mistake, that I was going to die proving right about me being unqualified. The fear was so intense I could barely think." The room had gone quiet, but it wasn't the hostile silence she was used to. It was attentive, interested. The other pilots were leaning forward slightly, genuinely engaged with what she was saying. "But my training took over," continued. "I remembered something my instructor told me years ago, that fear doesn't have to mean paralysis, that you can be afraid and still act. So I used the fear, let it sharpen my focus instead of clouding it. That maneuver I pulled, the engine shut down and restart, I had practiced it maybe twice in my entire career. It was desperate and probably stupid, but it worked." "That's not stupid," said seriously. "That's improvisation under pressure. That's what separates adequate pilots from exceptional ones. But I think everyone in this room has had moments where we did something desperate and got lucky. The difference is most of us don't have to deal with half the squadron waiting for us to fail." It was the most direct acknowledgement anyone had made of the hostile environment had been operating in. The fact that it came from, who had been openly skeptical of her leadership during the exercise, made it more significant. "For what it's worth," Captain added, "I was wrong about you. Wrong about your capabilities, wrong about your judgment, wrong about a lot of things. I let my preconceptions about what a fighter pilot should look like cloud my assessment of what you actually were. That's on me, not you." Others nodded, adding their own acknowledgments. They weren't quite apologies, but they were honest admissions of bias and error. Felt something shift inside her, a wall she hadn't even realized she was maintaining beginning to crack. "I haven't made it easy," said. "I was so focused on proving I belonged that I never tried to actually belong. I kept everyone at distance, refused to show any weakness, treated every interaction as a test I had to pass. I became exactly what you feared, someone who couldn't function as part of a team because I was too busy trying to prove I didn't need one." The conversation that followed went late into the night. It wasn't dramatic or transformative in any sudden way, but it was real, human, honest. Shared things she had never shared before, her doubts, her fears, her struggles with the constant pressure to be perfect. The other pilots responded with their own stories, creating an exchange of vulnerability that felt revolutionary after years of isolation. She learned that Lieutenant struggled with claustrophobia that made flying sometimes terrifying. That captain had failed his first command evaluation, and spent years rebuilding his reputation. That even major, before he became bitter and territorial, had once been a promotion he deserved because of political considerations beyond his control. Understanding didn't erase years of hostility and suspicion, but it created space for something different to develop. When finally left the common area around midnight, she felt more exhausted than any combat mission had ever made her, but also more hopeful than she had felt in years. The next morning, requested a meeting with Colonel. He received her in his office, which was decorated with photographs from his decades of service, a visual timeline of military aviation history. "Sir, I've made my decision about the special unit assignment," began. Leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "I'm listening." "I'm going to decline the offer." The words felt right as she spoke them, despite their professional implications. "I appreciate the recognition, and I understand the honor of being selected, but I don't want to be the exceptional outsider anymore. I want to be part of a squadron, part of a team. I want to build real connections with the people I fly with, not just coordinate tactical operations with them." "That's a significant decision," said neutrally. "This kind of opportunity may not come again." "I know, sir, but I've realized that what I really want isn't to be recognized as the best individual pilot. It's to be accepted as a valued member of a unit, someone who contributes not just through exceptional performance but through real connection and shared commitment. The special unit would give me the former, but I'd lose any chance of the latter." Was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, something had rarely seen from the serious commander. "You know what, Captain? That might be the most mature decision I've heard from a pilot in years. Most people chase recognition and advancement without thinking about what they're giving up. You figured out something important about what actually matters." "I'm not sure everyone will see it that way, sir. I imagine Regional Command will view my decision as ungrateful or short-sighted." "Let me worry about Regional Command," replied. "You focus on being the pilot and the squadron member you want to be, and I'm proud of you, not for the combat victories or the tactical brilliance, but for having the wisdom to choose connection over accolades." The days that followed brought subtle but meaningful changes to his experience in the squadron. Word spread about her decision to decline the special unit assignment, and reactions were mixed. Some saw it as foolish career self-sabotage. Others saw it as a positive sign that she was committed to being part of the unit rather than pursuing individual glory. But the most significant change was in herself. She made conscious efforts to participate in squadron activities beyond just professional duties. She joined the informal football matches that pilots organized on weekends. She contributed to the squadron fund that supported family members of deployed pilots. She stayed in the common area after briefings, engaging in casual conversation even when it felt awkward and uncertain. Most importantly, she started asking for help when she needed it, admitting when she was unsure about something, sharing her reasoning process with others instead of presenting only final decisions. It was uncomfortable at first, revealing uncertainty and vulnerability, but it created space for real collaboration, for the kind of two-way exchange that builds genuine relationships. Major remained distant and professional, his hostility transformed into cold courtesy, but began to understand him better through conversations with others who had known him longer. He wasn't simply a misogynist who hated women in aviation, though his biases certainly played a role. He was someone who had built his entire identity on being the unquestioned expert, the most experienced combat pilot, the tactical authority everyone deferred to. Survival and exceptional performance had challenged that identity at its core, threatening the foundation of how he understood himself. Understanding didn't excuse his behavior, but it made it comprehensible, human rather than simply villainous. And in understanding him, found she could let go of some of her anger and resentment. She didn't need his approval or his acceptance. She needed her own sense of belonging, her own connections with people who valued her for more than just her flying skills. 6 weeks after declining the special unit assignment, was flying a routine patrol with Captain when urgent communications came through from control. A commercial aircraft had been hijacked, and hostile fighters were attempting to escort it across the border into enemy territory. Multiple fighter squadrons were being scrambled to intercept, but were closest to the projected flight path. "All flights, this is control. We have a developing hostage situation. A civilian aircraft with 200 passengers has been hijacked and is being forced toward hostile airspace. Enemy fighters are providing escort. Your orders are to prevent the aircraft from crossing the border without engaging the civilian plane. Time is critical. Acknowledge. Acknowledged, her mind already racing through tactical options. She and were two aircraft against an unknown number of enemy fighters. They needed to separate the escorts from the civilian aircraft and disable or destroy the enemy fighters while ensuring no harm came to the hostages. 3-7, this is 2-8's voice came through. I'm thinking we divide and conquer. I draw off the escorts while you position to threaten the civilian aircraft's flight path, force them to turn back. It was a reasonable approach, but it put at significant risk, potentially facing multiple enemy aircraft alone. The old would have agreed, accepting the tactical division of labor without hesitation. But something had changed in her understanding of what leadership and partnership actually meant. -28 replied. We stay together, work as a team. We'll use a coordinated approach to engage the escorts simultaneously while maintaining threat presence on the civilian aircraft. I need your tactical insights on this, not just your sacrifice. They worked out a strategy together during the 3-minute flight to intercept point, each contributing ideas, challenging each other's assumptions, building something better than either could have developed alone. When they engaged the enemy fighters escorting the hijacked aircraft, they fought not as two exceptional individuals but as a coordinated team, each covering the other's vulnerabilities, each amplifying the other's strengths. The engagement was brief and decisive. The enemy escorts, surprised by the coordinated assault, broke away from the civilian aircraft and attempted to engage, and destroyed 2 of them and forced the 3rd to retreat with heavy damage. The hijacked civilian aircraft, deprived of its escorts and facing 2 determined fighter pilots blocking its path, had no choice but to turn back toward friendly airspace. Control, this is 3-7 and 2-8, transmitted, breathing hard from the G-forces of combat maneuvering. Hostile escorts destroyed or dispersed. Civilian aircraft is returning to controlled airspace. Recommend ground forces prepare for boarding operation when it lands. 3-7-2-8, outstanding work. All units be advised that hostage situation has been resolved. Ground teams are preparing for landing intercept. During the flight back to base, S voice came through on their private channel. You know, that tactical approach we worked out together was better than anything I would have come up with alone. Maybe even better than what you would have designed by yourself. Definitely better than what I would have designed alone, agreed. I'm learning that having the best individual ideas isn't as important as building on each other's perspectives. Look at you becoming a team player, said with audible smile in his voice. Who would have thought? I would have thought it was impossible a few months ago, admitted. Turns out I was wrong about a lot of things. The debriefing for the hostage rescue was different from previous mission reviews. Colonel praised both pilots equally, emphasizing their coordinated approach and mutual support. Other squadron members listened with genuine interest, asking questions about tactics, discussing how the techniques might apply to future scenarios. Notice that Major was absent from the debriefing, which was unusual for such a significant mission. She found him later that evening in the maintenance hangar, conducting a detailed inspection of his aircraft with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was avoiding other activities. Major said quietly, approaching but maintaining respectful distance. Looked up, his face carefully neutral. Captain, congratulations on your successful mission. Thank you, sir, hesitated, uncertain how to proceed. I wanted to talk with you about something if you have a moment. I have nothing to say to you, Captain. His voice was cold but not hostile, just empty. Then perhaps you could just listen, continued. I know we've had a difficult relationship. I know you've questioned my capabilities and my place in this squadron from the beginning, and I know that some of your concerns were legitimate. I was so focused on proving myself individually that I neglected the teamwork and connection that makes a squadron effective. His face remained impassive, but he didn't walk away. But I also know that your opposition wasn't just about tactical concerns, went on. It was about identity, about protecting your place and your reputation, about resisting changes that challenged how you understood the world. I get that now. I don't excuse the ways you tried to undermine me, but I understand them. Understanding doesn't change anything, said quietly. No, but maybe acceptance does. I'm not asking for your friendship or your approval. I'm asking if we can move forward with mutual respect, acknowledging each other's capabilities and limitations without the constant undercurrent of hostility. looked at her for a long moment, his weathered face impossible to read. "You've proven yourself capable, Captain, multiple times over. I was wrong to question your skills, but capability doesn't automatically translate to belonging. That's earned through time and shared experience." "Which is what I'm trying to build now," replied. "Not just capability, but connection. Not just proving I can fly, but proving I can be part of something larger than myself." "We'll see," said, not quite a commitment, but not a rejection either. He turned back to his aircraft inspection, but before could leave, he added quietly, "That coordinated engagement you and flew today was well executed. Textbook teamwork. Maybe you're learning after all." It wasn't warmth or acceptance, but it was acknowledgement, and for now, that was enough. 3 months later, stood before a new class of pilot trainees, having been assigned as one of the squadron's tactical instructors. She looked at the eager faces before her, diverse in background and experience, but united in their passion for flying. Among them were 2 women, younger than had been when she started, looking at her with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Welcome to tactical aviation," began. "This is going to be the hardest thing most of you have ever attempted. You're going to be pushed beyond what you think are your limits. You're going to face doubt from others and from yourselves. Some of you will face additional challenges based on who you are rather than what you can do, and all of you will have to decide what kind of pilot you want to become." She paused, thinking about her own journey, the victories and failures, the lessons learned through pain and persistence. Excellence matters, technical skill matters, tactical knowledge matters, but they're not enough. The best pilots I've ever known, the ones who truly excel in this demanding profession, they understand that flying is both an individual skill and a collective endeavor. You have to be good enough to handle your aircraft perfectly, but humble enough to learn from others. Confident enough to lead when necessary, but wise enough to follow when appropriate. Strong enough to endure pressure, but honest enough to admit when you need support. The trainees were listening with complete attention. Could see herself in some of their faces, that hunger to prove themselves, that determination to overcome every obstacle. "My journey to this point wasn't what I expected," continued. "I thought success would come from being undeniably excellent, from never showing weakness, from proving I could outperform everyone. And I did achieve excellence by those measures. I shot down enemy aircraft. I won impossible scenarios. I earned recognition and accolades. But I also spent years being lonely, isolated, unable to experience the camaraderie that makes this profession meaningful rather than just impressive." "What changed?" one of the female trainees asked. "I learned that being respected isn't the same as being valued," replied. "That proving your capabilities isn't the same as building relationships. That excellence without connection is a lonely path that ultimately limits how effective you can be. The missions I'm proudest of now aren't the ones where I succeeded alone, but the ones where I succeeded as part of a team, where my contributions helped others excel rather than just showcasing my own abilities." She looked directly at the 2 female trainees. "Some of you will face people who doubt whether you belong here, who question your capabilities before you've even demonstrated them, who move the goalposts every time you achieve something. That's wrong. It's unfair. And it's exhausting. But don't let their doubt turn you into someone so focused on proving them wrong that you forget why you wanted to fly in the first place. Fight for your place, absolutely, but fight to belong, not just to dominate. Fight to be part of something, not just to prove you can stand apart from it." As the training session continued, felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced before. She wasn't just teaching tactics or aircraft operations. She was helping shape the kind of pilots, the kind of people who would define the future of aviation. Some of them would be exceptional, shooting down enemy aircraft and performing impossible missions. But hopefully, all of them would understand that true excellence came not from individual achievement alone, but from the combination of personal capability and genuine connection. That evening joined several squadron members in the common area for the weekly film screening. It was a small thing, a simple social activity, but it represented everything that had changed in her relationship with the squadron. She wasn't the exceptional outsider anymore, the isolated achiever who proved her worth through solo brilliance. She was captain, accomplished fighter pilot, respected instructor, and valued member of a team. Major entered the common area as the film was about to start. He paused when he saw, and for a moment their eyes met. He gave a slight nod, acknowledgement without warmth but without hostility either. Then he took a seat and turned his attention to the screen. It wasn't friendship. It might never be friendship. But it was coexistence, mutual respect, the kind of professional relationship that allowed them both to focus on their duties rather than their conflicts. Captain dropped into the seat beside. You know, when you first arrived at this squadron, I thought you'd either wash out within 6 months or become some kind of tragic lone wolf who never connected with anyone. I came pretty close to the second one, admitted. But you didn't. You figured out something important. That the real victory wasn't proving you could succeed alone, but discovering you didn't have to. Thought about the path that had brought her here. The years of doubt and dismissal, the constant pressure to prove herself, the victories that felt hollow because they only reinforced her isolation. And then the gradual, difficult process of learning that true belonging required vulnerability as well as strength. That connection was as important as capability. That being part of something larger than herself didn't diminish her individual excellence but gave it meaning and purpose. She had destroyed 7 enemy aircraft across multiple engagements, proven her tactical brilliance in impossible scenarios, and earned recognition from the highest levels of command. Those achievements mattered, and she was proud of them. But the achievement she valued most was sitting in this room surrounded by people who knew her not just as an exceptional pilot, but as a flawed, striving, genuine human being. Someone who could lead when necessary, but also follow when appropriate. Someone who could demonstrate extraordinary individual skill, but also value and build upon the contributions of others. Someone who had finally learned that the hardest opponent she would ever face wasn't an enemy aircraft or a hostile military force. It was the part of herself that believed excellence and isolation were the same thing, that proving her worth required constant perfection, that showing vulnerability would inevitably lead to rejection. She had defeated that opponent not through overwhelming force or tactical brilliance, but through something much harder, the courage to be imperfect, the wisdom to ask for help, and the grace to build connections based on mutual humanity rather than competitive achievement. The film started and settled back in her seat, surrounded by her squadron, no longer fighting to prove she belonged but simply belonging. It was the quietest victory of her life and the most meaningful. "Neither do I," replied honestly, "but I think you need to figure it out because excellence without connection is a lonely path, and it's going to get lonelier." For her flying abilities, but respect and trust were different things. Trust required relationship, connection, the kind of bonds that formed through shared experiences and mutual vulnerability. All the things had avoided in her pursuit of excellence mind. She had won the battle, but the war for acceptance was far from over. She could see it in the eyes of the other pilots, hear it in the careful way they now spoke around her. She had become something they couldn't easily categorize or dismiss. Someone was out there, flying low, trying to stay beneath radar coverage, moving toward the border with deliberate stealth. This was it, the moment everything changed, and had exactly seconds to decide how to respond.